All right, guys. Ephesians chapter 6, verses 1 through 3. Let me read this for us. Children, everyone say, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Everyone say, this is right.
This is right.
Everyone say, this is right.
This is right. Right.
Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with a promise, so that it may go well with you and that you may enjoy long life on the earth. All right. Zoe opened us up in prayer, so I'm just going to go for it now. In his letter to the Ephesians, like in all of his other letters, Paul instructs believers, meaning members of the church, the body of Christ, how to live the Christian life. He says, this is what you do, this is what you don't do. This is what you believe, this is what you don't believe. In Ephesians, he spends a great deal of time teaching about what relationships within a Christian household should look like. Meaning in the family relationships, in a servant-master relationship, in a marriage, right? He begins this entire section with the command, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ, in chapter 5, verse 21. He's basically saying, since you are all followers of Jesus, you should submit to one another, specifically your appointed authorities, out of reverence to Christ. One of the most important authorities in our lives is our parents, whether you like it or not. They brought us into the world. They feed us and raise us. They clothe us and house us. They are the people you spend the most time with. Definitely, like when you're a teenager, whether you think so or not, you're always at home, right? As a pastor, I see you for about 4 to 5 hours a week, on average, unless we spend like other days with one another outside of Friday or Sunday. Depending on how long your classes are, your teachers see you about like 5 to 7 hours a week, tops, right? Unless you see them at the supermarket or something like that. In most households, you're probably with your parents or parental authorities for more than 50 hours per week. Probably more because of quarantine. Quarantine. And a lot of you guys are probably going a little crazy because you see your family a little too much, right? So whether you think you do or not, you have inherited much of your personality and many of your values, your beliefs, your lifestyle, your interests, etc. from your parents. The 2 times where my mom compares me with my dad the most is when I'm singing praise to God and when I'm eating, right? Because I find myself reaching for a lot of the same snacks my dad reaches for. I get passionate about the things my parents are passionate about without even knowing it. I even get upset about the things that my parents get upset at, like whether it's about the world or about anything else. Even when you want to rebel, I realize you end up doing and saying what you've seen them do and say, because that's the example that you've seen. And most of you, if not all of you, start coming to church because of your parents. Since even before you're born, they are your God-ordained authority, and God calls for you to obey and honor them. The command to honor our parents goes all the way back to when? The 10 Commandments in Exodus chapter 20. It is the first commandment mentioned concerning human relationships with each other. So the first 4 are like, do not have any other gods before me. Do not make yourself an idol. Do not speak the Lord's name in vain. This is all about our relationship with God. But the first of all the ones about relationship with other people, this is the first one. Which makes sense because it's the first relationship you have when you enter the world. Yeah, believe it or not, you had a relationship with your mom long before you had a relationship with your friend. It makes a lot of sense. And the commandment tells us to honor our parents. Honor always seemed like this mystical word to me. Like I didn't really understand what it meant. It was used in like a lot of kung fu movies. It was used when Mulan wanted to bring it to her family. Like I didn't really understand what it meant, and it seemed like this kind of like foreign idea to me. But honoring your father and mother is being respectful in word and action and having an inward attitude of esteem or respect for their position. One more time, because I needed to understand this for myself. Honoring your father and mother is being respectful in word and action and having an inward attitude of esteem for their position. The Greek word for honor means to revere, to prize, and to value. So the question that I want to ask you today is, do you revere, prize, and value your parents? Do you revere, prize, and value their words? Come on, somebody. Or are they just background noise to you? Like when they're talking, it's just like that teacher in Charlie Brown, and you just hear wah 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 wah. Like, or do you actually do their words carry weight to you? To give an example, when I ask someone to be my mentor, it's usually because I respect their opinion even more than my own. I basically trust that their word is right even when I don't think so, because I value their word. It's so weighty to me. For instance, one of my mentors, Pastor Paul, his words have so much weight to me that I do whatever he says, trusting that he's right? He says, move here. And I'm like, okay, I moved across the country, right? I remember this one time I called him up and I was like, Pastor Paul, it's so hard. I'm so discouraged. You know, it's so hard for me to trust God. Like, why is he doing this? And usually he's really encouraging. But one time over the phone, you know what he says? He says, Andrew, are you a Christian? And I was like, he's like, do you love God? Do you believe in Jesus, right? And I was like, yeah. And he's just like, then why do you want it your way, not God's way? And I was like, oh my goodness, you know? And he has the authority to do that because I trust him that he loves me and that he knows better than I do. And so when we trust our parents and when we give weight to their words, we are saying that I might not understand, but I respect and honor that you know better than me and that you love me. One of the greatest ways we demonstrate honor is through obedience. Everyone say obedience. Obedience is, thank you, Joanne teacher. Obedience is respecting someone and their words enough to do what they say. You know how I can tell, like when you value your teacher's words, you do what they say. You know how I could tell that you don't value your teacher's words? You don't do anything they say. You don't even listen, right? It's saying, I trust you and your opinion, so I will listen to you and do what you say. This is honor. That obedience which God demands from their children in their behalf includes an inward reverence as well as the outward expressions and acts. It's this saying that I don't just do what you say religiously. So for instance, right, I don't just do what my parents say just because like, oh, like, blah, 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 like they just want me to do this, right? But it's in my inward desire to love God and to love them. It's this inward desire, not just outward actions. So one of the first signs of a breakdown in a society is when children refuse to obey their parents. I want you to know how serious this really is, right? Just look around you guys, like in a lot of cities, when children are not obeying their parents, like you could tell the breakdown of society is happening. And naturally, when parents are not being respected, it also shows that there isn't respect for God. And so in both Romans and Timothy, as well as several other letters of Paul, this is crazy. You guys have to recognize this. That one of the surefire signs that Paul gives that the end times are near is that you will start seeing disobedience to parents. And I was like, oh man, New York is we're gonna see the end of the world pretty soon, right? And Paul in Ephesians, he is trying to lead them the right way because he's saying that the church must stand out from the rest of the world. And so he gives us two reasons for us to obey our parents. There's many reasons, but he gives us two main reasons. And the first one is that we obey our parents because it is right. Everyone say, it is right. Tell a neighbor, it is right. And Paul says to obey your parents in the Lord. That's verse 1. Obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. You know what this means, guys? This means that if you're obeying your parents, you're obeying God. Wow. That's just simply put, right? If you're disobeying your parents, do you know what that means? You're living in sin. I know we don't see it like that. We just see it like this optional thing, but it says, no, it is right. That means it is righteous. It is what God wants, what He commands. We should fight to obey our parents like we fight to overcome lust or pride. We should honor our parents because we want to honor God. We have this inward desire to honor Him. God takes obedience to our parents so seriously that in the Levitical law, Moses says, this is Leviticus 20, verse 9, anyone who curses their father or mother is to be put to death. You know what it says in Deuteronomy chapter 21? This is what Moses is telling the Israelites. They say if you have a disobedient child, a rebellious child, and they're just living in sin and they refuse to obey, they say hand this child over to the elders and they're gonna take them out of the city and stone them. And I was like, wow, how many of us would get stoned today if that was the law, right? But thanks be to Jesus. Anyway, like other commands in the Bible, the command to honor and obey our parents isn't optional, right? It's not like we get to choose which commands to obey and which ones not to obey, right? This is a command of God, right? Just like do not murder is a command of God. There will be times where we don't want to honor our parents, let's be real. There might be times where we don't even like our parents. Let's be really real. They might be angry and say something hurtful, and you're like, well, I don't feel like I'm in the mood to honor them. We are still called to honor. Just like you are still called to forgive when you don't feel like forgiving. Come on, somebody. Just like you are called to worship God when you don't feel like worshiping God. We are still called to honor our parents. Let me give you an example. Jesus honored his parents. The only account that we get even close to his teenage years comes from Luke chapter 2, verse 51. And Jesus is like teaching people in the temple as a 12-year-old boy, and the parents are like, Jesus, where'd you go? You totally freaked us out. We thought we lost you. And he was like, didn't you know I had to be in my father's house? Imagine this 12-year-old boy. But in Luke 2:51, it says, then he went down to Nazareth with them and was obedient to them. And this put such a funny image in my mind. Can you imagine raising Jesus? Like you have to be the one to correct him and teach him how to live life. And imagine like Mary and Joseph like trying to have a talk with him and like sitting him down, and they're just like, Jesus, didn't you know this was right? And then I imagine Jesus looking at his parents and being like, you have heard it said, but I tell you, right? Or like they're trying to teach him about the law of Moses, and he's like, well, actually, like what God really means. And I imagine him, like I can't imagine what it's like to raise him, because he is God as a man, he's God as a child, he's God as a teenager, right? And I can't even imagine what that looks like. But Jesus, in full humility and submission, said, I will honor and I will obey out of my honor to God. Come on, somebody. And if Jesus did it, you better believe you got to do it. And so also for the parents, Paul and the law of Moses expected that parents teach their children obedience. So basically, this is what a good parent should do. It is essential that a parent teach the child obedience so that the child, the son and daughter, will grow up knowing how to obey God even when he doesn't understand everything or doesn't want to. We learn obedience from our parents first before we even learn obedience to God. This is why a good parent disciplines their children. When your parents discipline you, and I don't mean excessively punish, I mean discipline, disobedience must be punished so that obedience can be learned. Proverbs 13 verse 24, Solomon, the wisest man who ever lived, says, whoever spares the rod hates his child, but he who loves him is diligent to discipline him. Meaning that when your parents discipline, It's because they love you. They don't want you to become a brat. they don't want you to become a spoiled child who can't do anything for themselves and who doesn't know how to respect people, etc., etc. And later on, trust me, we honor and we respect our parents for disciplining us, even though it totally blows in the moments. And so make sure you thank your parents even for disciplining you. Okay, the second reason we obey our parents that Paul says is so that it may go well with you and that you may enjoy long life on the earth. Okay, so this is pretty straightforward, guys. We obey our parents because it will go better for you than if you don't. Trust me, right? Basically, your life will be better if you obey your parents. Why? Because they love you and they know better than you. Right? If any of you think that you know better than your parents other than about social media or something like that, I'm sure there's something that you know about more than your parents, but about life, they know better than you, right? I had to wrap my head around this, and I want to tell you guys that, did you know your parents used to be teenagers? Just, fun fact, right? Like, did you know that they didn't come out of the womb and, they had a beard, but they grew up, right? And they went through stages of life just like you. Did you know that they went to school and they studied? Did you know that they've been in relationships before? You're here, right? And they've been through all of this before, right? And that's why you should listen to what they say, because they have been through everything you've been through, and they've been around much longer. And their perspective has a greater range than yours. And so it's funny because a lot of teenagers have come up to me and asked me, like, is it wrong to get a tattoo? And I'm like, no, I don't think it's wrong. I don't think it's like biblical. But I always tell them, just listen to whatever your parents say, right? Do you know why? It's because you can only see your perspective right now, but they see your perspective plus like 30, 40 years. And so while you're saying, this is funny to me, because while you're saying that you want a tattoo because you want it now, they're thinking about what that tattoo will look like in 40 years. They're thinking about what your boss is gonna think about it. Come on, somebody. they're thinking about you down the line. When they tell you to eat nutritious food, they're not just thinking about you right now. They're thinking about your body in 20, 30 years. They're thinking about you down the line. When they tell you to study, come on, somebody, they are thinking about your life years from now, and they are saying, do it now so you won't regret it later. Why? Because they love you more than you love you, if that's even possible, right? They love you so much, and their perspective is so much greater. Can I just be real and serious for a sec? How many times, and trust me, like, I've known people who have had this happen. How many times do children who are not disciplined die early because they have never been taught to follow the rules? I know so many people, because of disobedience to their parents, that they've actually died early, right? And probably more common is how many times have people suffered in later life because they were allowed to just do things on their own, eat whatever food they wanted, do whatever they want, right? And if they make it to their later years, their bodies suffer from lack of proper nutrition. Their bodies suffer from doing the wrong things or not doing the right things. For instance, can I be real, guys? When I lived in Chicago, for the first time in my life, I started to miss vegetables. And I was like, what's wrong with me? Like, what's happening? I'm transforming. And it's because you don't realize what your parents are giving you is good until you don't have it anymore. And we think that they're just lecturing us, but they actually love us so much that they tell us what to do because they don't want us to regret it. A young person who is smart enough to realize that the Lord had placed mom and dad in their life for a reason will escape many of life's trials and hardships. If we would only listen when we are young and learn from mom and dad's mistakes, we would not have to make them ourselves. A wise person learns from the mistakes of others so that we could not make the same mistakes. These verses are simply saying that a Christian young person, child, daughter, son, should trust the Lord to work through their parents for their benefit and blessing. That your life will be better, not just now, but in the long run if we obey our parents. You know, before I learned to hear the voice of God, you know who was the voice of God in my life? Mostly my mom. that you know, as a kid I would play video games, and then I would be playing for a super long time, and then the voice of the Holy Spirit would come to me and tell me that it's time to get off. And by the Holy Spirit I mean my mother. and God would anoint my mom and my dad, you know, to tell me to do my homework, to study, to go to church. And they would be the voice of the Lord for me because God was using them to lead me to honor Him. And if we honor our mom and we honor our dad, then as a pretty consistent rule, there's many exceptions, obviously, of bad parenting. But as a rule, you can trust that if you obey and honor your parents, your life will be better. So, how should we honor our parents? Like, what does that mean for us? What does that look like, right? Because, again, I don't want it to be this mystical idea, but I want it to become practical today. The first thing that we do is listen to them. Everyone say, listen to them. You can't obey and you can't honor without listening. Just like you can't obey God without reading His word or listening to what He says to you, you can't obey without listening. Listen to their words. Value their words. Treasure their words. Here's another way you can listen. Ask how they're doing. You don't know the whole story. Understand their side. Stop being selfish and feel like only your side matters. Stop being like, oh, my mom doesn't understand. Well, you don't understand. That's why you're like that. That's why you feel like that, right? And that's why you have to listen to understand. Guys, listen to me. Don't treat your mom and dad as background noise. They are your authorities. They are your parents. They love you. Don't treat them as you do everything else. Don't turn on music in the background. Don't treat them like the music in the background. Treat them like people who love you. Next thing, number 2, obey them. Everyone say obey them. You know, when I think about not just my parents, but parents in general, and especially our moms, when we were little kids, when we ask, why do I have to do this thing that you're telling me to do? The most common answer that I hear all across the board from all my parents' moms is because I said so. And now that I know the scriptures, I could just tell you guys that they are right to say that. Why? Because God Himself says it is right to obey them, right? And when I was a small group teacher back in California, I had this kid ask me, right, because he was always the devil's advocate, and he was like, "What if my parents want me to rob a bank, right?" And so let me just put it like this: the only time you don't obey your parents is when obeying God supersedes obeying your parents. And so yes, okay, let me just put it like this: if your parents sit you down for this week and your mom is like, look, I know that APs are really hard, so just cheat. Then yes, you have my permission to disobey your mom. You have my permission to disobey your parents. But outside of that, obey their words because it is right and it will go well for you. Number 3, help them. Everyone say help them. Don't let them do it by themselves. Guys, when you look around your house and you see your parents doing stuff, especially around the house, and you're in quarantine now, so they're gonna be doing a lot of things around the house, they realize they do the things they do not because it's necessarily fun for them, but because if they don't, no one else will. They wash the dishes because if they don't, no one else will. They sweep the floor, they vacuum the rug, they take out the trash, whatever it is, they do it because if they don't, it doesn't magically disappear, right? As a child, I thought it would magically disappear until my mom moved out, and I was like, why is my bed so dirty? Why do my clothes smell? And I realized it's not magic, someone does it, right? Someone has to do it. And so what I'm telling you today is do it first and do it for them. Beat them to it. Say, can I do it? I remember in John 19 that one of the last thing, Jesus is hanging on a cross with nails in his hands. He's bleeding and dying. You know what he says? He looks at his mom and he looks at his disciple and he says, John, I need you to take care of my mom for me. And I was like, this is him on his deathbed. Jesus is crazy, yo. Like he doesn't even think about himself. He's not like, I'm in pain. He's like mom, I want to make sure you're taken care of, right? Help your mom. Help your dad, guys. Be like Jesus. 4, encourage them. Everyone say encourage them. Y'all better be writing this down because you're going to do all of them today. Encourage them. Guys, recognize your parents aren't invincible. Life hurts them. Life discourages them. You think you know discouragement? Man, imagine having to make meals every single day and you don't get thanked once. Come on, somebody. Imagine being a parent and you give your life for these children, and all they do is complain, and they don't ever. And can you imagine, right? Like, you don't have to deal with the finances. Encourage your parents today. Be an encouragement to your mother today. Don't just let them do stuff, but let them know how much you appreciate. And that leads me to the last step, number 5. Thank them. Don't just think it. Don't just feel it. Don't be one of those kids who are like, oh, well, you know, my parents know I appreciate. No. Just be quiet. Just thank them. Say it. Right? Say it in words. Write it to them, right? Because they don't know, right? They don't know you're thankful. And it's crazy what one thank you can do. So in conclusion, I want to kind of transition this into Mother's Day just for a second. And the simple and obvious, but often forgotten truth is this: you will never be able to repay your mother. I will never be able to repay my mother. She's in the next room, and I hope she's listening. Because your mother, she carried you inside your body and said that you're worth giving life to. She nursed you and she raised you. She made sure you never went hungry, and she gave you a home. She gave you clothes and she gave you shoes. She probably taught you to tie them too. She gave you your first education, most likely, and made sure you continue to have a good education. She took care of you when you were sick. Heck, she probably took care of you when she was sick. And since the day you were born, she said that her needs came second. But you know what the craziest thing about a mother's love is, guys? And listen to me now. In your mother's eyes and in your heart, your simple card on a simple piece of paper, your simple request to say, can I wash the dishes? You asking to massage her when she's tired. Or you just saying, I love you in words. In your mother's eyes and in her heart, that is enough to make you even. And that's the craziest thing about a mother's love. So today, my commission to each and every one of you, PYM, is this. Let's honor our parents, especially our mothers today, for Mother's Day. And I just want to address one last thing. If you don't have a mother in your life, and this is real, so I have to address it, honor a mother figure in your life. Whether that's a teacher or pastor, someone who's been that figure to you, or even a father figure in your life. Because by the grace of God, I think you've been surrounded by a lot of people who want to lead you the right way. Honor them today and every day by doing 5 things. Listen to them, obey them, help them, encourage them, and thank them. And you will fulfill the law of God in honoring your parents.